You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
It is Sons of the Shoe. It is Spencer German with you here for another show, for another episode as we get you ready for actual Buckeyes football this week. That's right, Buckeyes back in business after their loss to Oregon 2 weeks ago as they will host Nebraska. And the former Ohio State Buckeye recruit, Dylan Raiola, the quarterback for Nebraska, and a Nebraska team that really, I think this program has come a long way already in terms of the rebuild that is kind of underway here under Matt Rule, the head coach there. And it's a program that had obviously once was one of the more prominent ones in the country and had several decades worth of just dilapidated years. And so it's actually good to see, and I think Nebraska become a competitive team. But the Buckeyes obviously need a big win to bounce back from the Oregon game and reposition themselves back in the national championship picture, especially with what waits on the other side, which we will talk about a little bit today as well. I want to remind you that this is a relatively new podcast. We're over a year old now, so maybe we're not relative. I think we're over a year old. I think we're coming up on actually the 1 year anniversary, the weekend of the Penn State game, maybe, because it's usually always like Halloween weekend, and that's about where we're going to get that game again. So I think we're coming up on being a year-old podcast, but we want you to follow, subscribe, review. Reviewing the podcast is great too because it lets people know that you enjoy the show, and then it pops up in people's recommended shows, and then they can also jump in and listen to the show with you, and we can have a nice little community here, our Sons of the Shoe. See what I did there? I just took the name and made it into what we're going to call our community of people. But anyway, wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Apple, Spotify, did I mention Apple, as Nick likes to say? Also, the 92 Through the Fan YouTube channel. You can find us there. But no Nick, as you can tell this week. That's okay. He's got a lot going on, a lot on his plate. But I am here to help us preview this matchup with Nebraska. And we're going to do the standard way we've been doing this more of late, where we kind of go through some different points of reference that we're going to look at and break down as we get set for what should be a fun matchup on Saturday, and one that obviously we know is important for Ohio State because coming off that loss to Oregon, the margin of error is just a little bit thinner now as you navigate the Big Ten. If you are hoping to make the college football playoff, get back into the picture for the Big Ten championship game, which you obviously still are at this point with just the one loss. But yeah, there's a lot that still has to play out, and this is kind of the next step towards getting the season back on track the way that we hope it does. We start when we do our previews with the topic we call the upset scale. On what scale from 1 to 10 could this game feel like it potentially is an upset for the Buckeyes? And I'm going to go with what am I going to go with here? I think I'm going to go with about a 6. I think this Nebraska team is good enough that they can give you a little bit of a scare, but I am not overly worried about them. I would say most weeks I probably go into a game around a 5 is probably the average, because there's always a chance, right? There's always a little bit of nervousness. I guess I would say Akron, we weren't doing this at the time, but Akron, Western Michigan, I would have probably gotten into those games and said a 2 or a 1. I wasn't necessarily worried about those two teams upsetting Ohio State, and obviously they didn't. But when you get into Big Ten play, opponents that know you well, opponents that see you every single year pretty much, and that I think the Big Ten has progressively gotten better and better in terms of the teams and the talent that's kind of being spread around the conference now. I think it's worth noting that this Nebraska team could give you a little bit of a scare. So I go a little bit above an average, which would be a 5, and I say a 6, just because if you sleepwalk through this game or you're rusty in this game, yeah, Dylan Raiola is a freshman, but he is the type of quarterback that can make enough plays to potentially, pull off some miraculous win or upset or whatever it might be. So I'm going to put this one at a 6. I'm not overly concerned. I think Ohio State should win. Vegas is telling you that Ohio State should win by a large margin, but it still is kind of in the back of your mind that that there's always that possibility with a Nebraska team that I think is on the rise in terms of their recruiting and their stature in the Big Ten, but also across college football. That brings us next to names to know in this matchup this weekend, and I think the obvious one is going to be Dylan Raiola, or as he likes to think of himself, the Patrick Mahomes doppelganger. He has a 66.2 completion percentage, 1,592 yards, 9 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. He threw for a career and season high 297 yards against Illinois a couple weeks back. So he has the ability to go out and sling this ball around the field, which gives you some, again, is probably part of the reason why I put the scale like a 6. We all saw what this Ohio State secondary looked like against Oregon. Now, I'm not saying that Nebraska's skill positions and talent on in that regard are anywhere near what Ohio State has, or what Oregon had in the game last 2 weeks ago. Because I mean, Oregon maybe could stack their skill position players up with anybody in terms of Ohio State, Georgia, any of the best teams in the country. Their skill positions are right there in the conversation, right there in the mix. So like I think that's maybe where the big discrepancy is. But because of how poorly that secondary played in that game, I think we're all a little bit weary of what this thing looks like moving forward, and if that group really is the best in America, as they like to call themselves. And so you're going to get a little bit of a test in a quarterback that can be a gunslinger and can sort of sling it around and make some plays. So I'm not overly concerned with Dylan Raiola, but I do like he's the most notable player on this team to know and pay attention to. I also think his top receiver, Isaiah Nayor, is a guy to keep an eye on. He has 19 catches, 304 yards, and he has 4 of his 9 touchdowns. Of the 9 touchdowns that Dylan Raiola has, he has 4 of them. So he is the guy that can make some plays. How they cover him, it's the difference is you're maybe only really worried about Nayor is obviously the guy who's kind of leading the team here and leading the charge here, and the guy that you're most nervous about from this Nebraska team. But that doesn't mean that other guys can't do damage as well. They have Jamal Banks on the outside as kind of a compliment to Nayor, and he hasn't put up quite the same statistics as Nayor has. He's got not just 94 yards and 1 touchdown, but he also caught a 31-yarder against Rutgers earlier this month. So there are some opportunities for these guys to make some plays, and Raiola certainly gives them a chance to be more explosive and do some different things and attack some different things. But that's kind of the front line of the position, the wide receiver position, but also the skill positions for the Cornhuskers. Now, as we divulge a little bit further into this matchup, there are some other things that you're going to want to pay, some other players that you're going to want to pay attention to. I do think it's probably worth at least. I think it's probably worth mentioning on the defensive side of the ball, Ty Robinson, who has 12 tackles this year, 5 tackles for a loss, 3 of those are sacks. He is their big time disruptor on the defensive front, a guy that can make some plays and that can cause some problems for any opponent. Probably, I mean, he's a redshirt senior, so he's got that sort of that veteran savviness to his game, and he's going to be a guy that I think could probably goes, I don't know about highly in the draft, but he's going to get drafted next year because he is that sort of talented player and a guy that I think can certainly play at the next level, as well as we're seeing him be disruptive in the Big Ten and in college football this year. So, and because of Ohio State's offensive line issues, and we've seen some of those kind of bear out throughout, every single week. But now you mentioned, as you mentioned, the offensive line issues. Obviously, we know what happened to Josh Simmons, who is now out for the season, and that's a big blow. Now, I don't know necessarily that you're going to see Ty Robinson lining up outside of the, in the 9 spot or like as a 5 or whatever, where he's going up against a tackle. But the problems elsewhere on the offensive line and not having Simmons out there could give him opportunities because, you overload one side and make somebody else, cause some problems to a weaker spot. Now he can maybe leak through in the middle and cause some damage. So he's another guy to obviously to keep an eye on. And I also wrote down cornerback Malcolm Hartzog, who has 3 interceptions this season. That's pretty impressive. He can make some plays. Now it's a little bit different. I don't know that they've gone up against anybody who has the skill position players that Ohio State has, and so that's going to become something that he's going to have to like he's whoever he's going up against. Whoever he's guarding on a regular basis, play after play, he's going to have his hands full because this Ohio State receiving core is so good. But the difference is there are other places that Will Howard and others can go. He doesn't have to just hone in on whatever side Hartzog is on and go to that specific player. But those are some names to know. That brings us to the next phase of our preview, which is the key matchup in this game. And for me, I'm looking at you, Denzel Burke, and I don't care if he's going up against Nair. I don't care if he's going up against Banks, whoever he is going up against in this game. I need to see him shut down this Nebraska receiving core, most notably Nair, because that game that he played against Oregon was god awful. And you guys let him know. We let him know on the post game episode, but you guys let him know in the comments during the post game episode just how bad he performed in that game. If it's not what you've come to expect from a player of his caliber, a guy that's probably going to be on pace or be in the conversation for being a first-round pick as a cornerback in the NFL draft next year, like there were some serious issues there. And more than anything, I think it's just about like he needs a bounce-back game. He needs to have a performance that makes us sort of reinstitute our confidence in him. And the other thing I'll give you, the Buckeyes defensive line versus Nebraska's offensive line, because this Nebraska offensive line has given up 14 sacks this year. That's 68th overall in college football. It's tied with like a whole bunch of different teams, but it's 68th. And there are some opportunities to get to the quarterback. There are some opportunities to make some plays. Dylan Raiola is not the most mobile quarterbacks. Like he's not out here running around a lot and doing a ton with his feet. He actually, statistically, he has like negative rushing yards because of how many times he's been sacked at this point so far this season. And so there should be opportunities to get to the quarterback, to make life hard for Dylan Raiola, and to not let him, get off the mat, if you will. And given again how this team played against Oregon, I need to see them dominate in offensive line to sort of reinstill some confidence in their ability to make those plays against the superior or level teams that they're going to face come college football playoff time, assuming they get there. So yeah, Dylan Raiola is not this mobile quarterback. He's a guy that is going to be in the pocket more. And so if they can't get pressure on him in this matchup against a Nebraska team that has given up a bunch of sacks this year, then we have some serious problems as the rest of the season plays out. My educated wish, which is a line from Deadpool. Yes, if you're a Deadpool fan, that's what it is from. But it is kind of our way of saying the thing that we want to see the most in this matchup, the thing that we're really looking for in this game to sort of make us feel good about the Buckeyes or make us feel good about a certain area of the Buckeyes. And for me, I'm just going to say pure dominance. Indiana curb stomped this team last week. And Indiana, that's not me trying to I am not trying to downplay Indiana. They have been an impressive team this year. They're on Ohio State's schedule, and we'll talk here coming up about the importance of that Penn State game next week, because if you lose that one, Indiana is like the only good team left on your schedule. And so that game's going to matter, and Indiana's having a really, really impressive season. So I'm not trying to downplay Indiana, but Indiana curb stomped this team. If you're a real national title contender, like Ohio State is supposed to be, you should also curb stomp this team. You cannot be losing to the Patrick Mahomes impersonator, okay? I know that he was almost going to be a Buckeye, and he probably would be doing all this sticky stuff here where he's acting like Patrick Mahomes and he's got the same haircut and all this different stuff. But guys, he was under duress last week against Indiana. He did not look good. They put up 7 points, I think they scored in that game. Like, it was an ugly, ugly performance for Nebraska. And like, you should be able to do the same thing and wreak the same sort of havoc that Indiana did if you are truly a national title contender. And if you're not, then this is a real like look in the mirror moment. So I want to see pure dominance. I want to see them get back to dominating a football team. And that's the big hiccup for me, or that's the big thing right now for me that I'm going into this saying as my educated wish. It would make me feel better about things after having 2 weeks to sort of sit and stew on what happened in the Oregon game if they just come out and they just absolutely dominate this matchup, which is what I think should happen. And then lastly, guys, courtesy of our friends at FanDuel, we give you the odds in this game. Ohio State, as I mentioned, them dominating Nebraska or needing to dominate Nebraska, they are 25.5-point favorites at home against the Cornhuskers. So if that makes you feel any better, Ohio State is favored very, very heavily in this game. The money line, if you want to bet Nebraska, is plus 1,600, so you can win some decent money there. And the over-under is 48.5, which tells you if they only think the over-under is 48.5, they do not think much of this Nebraska team. They assume that Ohio State is going to like blow them out while keeping it, maybe not scoring more than like 30-something points, and Nebraska only gets like 10. So that's kind of an interesting nugget for you there in terms of, which is a blowout to be fair. But yeah, so that's an interesting little thought there. I'm going to go ahead and say, and this feels maybe a little bit crazy because Ohio State is 3-3 against the spread this year. And I have lacked some confidence in them after the Oregon performance, but I'm going to go ahead and say that they're going to come out ready to go in this game and re-energize with sort of this new purpose after the bye week, and that they're going to take care of business against a team that they should dominate the same way Indiana did. So I'm going to say they actually cover the 5.5 points. What say you? Do you think did I say 5.5? The 25.5 points. That is a massive, massive margin, but I'm going to say they cover it. What say you? Do the Buckeyes cover the 25.5 point spread that Vegas has them favored by? What is your educated wish? What do you want to see from this team? And what is the upset scale? How worried are you about an upset in this matchup against Nebraska? That is our preview portion of the show. When we get back, I explain why I'm still upset. I will get into why the bye week last week was the worst possible thing for this Ohio State team. And does the Penn State game on the other side of this weekend's matchup decide the state of Ohio State's season? We'll talk about all those things and more when we get back here on Sons of the Shoe. Guys, I still hate that there was a bye week last week. I understand. Like, it's funny. Going into the Oregon game, I actually thought the bye week was a good thing. I was like, oh, this is perfect. We had just seen Bama beat Georgia. And then the following week, it was like a letdown performance. It was one of those games where like you had this high of highs because you win against the number one team in the country. Or maybe they were number 2 at the time. I think they were number 2 at the time. You beat the number 2 team in the country, one of your biggest rivals in conference, and you're riding sky high from that. And then on the other side, you have a Vanderbilt team that Nick Saban's out here saying, nobody has trouble playing at Vanderbilt. That's not a very tough place to play, whatever it might be. And then you go out and you have kind of this letdown performance where you lose that game. And obviously that creates this whirlwind of different things in the rankings and just what played out in the weeks that have followed. And then Bama loses again. But like, I just thought the idea of you play Oregon on the road and going into it feeling pretty good about their chances to win, I came out of it sort of like, okay, if they win this game, I love the idea that there's a bye week on the other side and that it gives you a chance to sort of recoup a little bit, get yourself refocused before you go take the field for whatever for your next game against Nebraska. Now, though, because they lost that game, I absolutely hated the bye being there. I'm just being honest because now, like, I wanted nothing more to erase and wash the stench of that Oregon loss and everything that transpired at the end. And Ryan Day now falling to 1-7 against top 3 teams, which I continue to bring up because I'm going to continue to bring it up because it can't be ignored any longer. Like, you could have erased a lot of those things by having an opportunity to go out and play a game the week immediately after. And that's part of the beauty of football, right? NFL level, college level, it's so week to week. And so we live and die with the result one week. And then the next week you have a chance to change our entire perspective about you. And we didn't have that. So I mentioned sitting and stewing. Like, we had to sit in our own Ohio State shit for a week thinking about all that went wrong, how bad Denzel Burke was, how bad the defensive line was, how bad the defense as a whole was, how bad Jim Knowles was, how bad Ryan Day was, how they botched that play at the end, how college football rules are stupid if they allow you to put 12 men on the field and then basically run one and then get the flag, and then you don't reset the clock for the offense, and how that puts you at a disadvantage, which they have now gone about changing because that rule is complete bullshit. But yeah, like that was not a fun thing to sort of sit and stew in it, even though a week reflection also allowed me to calm down a little bit. I wanted a game last Saturday really, really badly. So I hated it at the time. I still think it's going to help the Buckeyes refocus here for what is left on the season. Like, I think there was so much buildup to that game and that matchup. Like, before the season started, people were already talking about it. People were circling it. People knew that was like a pseudo Big Ten championship game of sorts. And so to get out there and get it out of the way now, and you can sort of move forward with understanding what you need to do now to make the playoff and what lies ahead for you. That's, there's some comfort in that, I guess, of like, okay, you got that one out of the way. Now we can refocus. Things that they want to achieve are still in front of them because by the nature of the new college football playoff, you're not just screwed with one loss now. And so there's plenty of room for this team to still grow and make some plays and get better and still get to that level we think they should be at. Now, if you want to question if Ryan Day is the guy to do that, that's totally fine. We've done that the last couple of shows. But like, I do feel good about them coming out of this bye week. I just hated that there was one in the end when I originally loved it, because I didn't want to have to sit and wait 2 weeks for this team to play again after they lost to Oregon the way that they did, which just felt like it was gut-wrenching fashion. Now, that said, I've talked about Indiana being one of the better teams in the country. Perhaps surprisingly, I don't know that people were talking about Indiana as a team that Ohio that was going to challenge in the Big Ten. And I'm not saying they're even going to win the Big Ten necessarily, but I don't know that there was a lot of love for Indiana when the season started. But they have certainly taken this conference by storm. They've taken the sport by storm. And the Ohio State plays them the week before the Michigan game, November 23rd. You can't be looking past this game because Michigan is the biggest game of the year always, but Indiana is not even a sleeping giant. Like, they are just outside the top 10 right now in the rankings at 13. And so that's going to be an important game in terms of where they find themselves in the college football playoff picture. If they were to meet Oregon again in the Big Ten championship game and lose again, you have multiple losses. But if your only win is over a 13th ranked, and that's assuming they stay undefeated at this point, and they keep climbing, Indiana, like, their non-conference is so bad that I'm going to be honest with you guys, like, this game against Penn State after this week, and this is, again, why the upset scale can maybe be there this week, because you can't get caught looking ahead to Penn State. But that Penn State game, theoretically, could decide Ohio State season. Because, yeah, like, you could lose to Penn State and then still run the table the rest of the way and finish with just 2 losses and be a 2-loss Big Ten team that maybe doesn't, but you probably don't end up playing for the Big Ten championship in that scenario if Penn State then also runs the table. And I understand these are all hypotheticals, but this is what makes college football and the conversation around college football so fun, is imagining all the different outcomes that can happen. It's like why we get excited about the idea that Army and Navy could both beat Notre Dame, be undefeated, play for their conference championship, and then play again a week later. Like, this is the type of stuff that gets us excited in college football, is all the different scenarios that could theoretically happen. But yeah, like, if you lose that Penn State game, not only is Ryan Day's like seat like flaming hot, where it's like burning through his pants at this point, he's probably going to get canned. after the Michigan game, no matter what happens in that game. But you cannot lose that game if you have hopes of making the playoff. If that means you're going to lose in the, especially if you lose in the Big Ten championship game again, potentially to Oregon. Like if you met Oregon in the Big Ten championship game and you have a loss to, and you have, and your only losses are to Oregon 2 different times, you can survive that and still make the playoff as like an at-large team, especially with Ohio State being the brand that it is. But if you lose to Penn State and then your only maybe win over a ranked team this season is Indiana later in November, that's not going to bode well for you finding a sort of backdoor way into the college football playoff. That is going to be a problem for the Buckeyes because they're non-conference this year, and it's not necessarily all their fault. Like these games get planned so far out in advance, and most of them, I know they did change the Akron game this year. I forget what the original game was supposed to be, but they obviously added Akron early in the season, and that was the one change. But again, you're not impressing the committee with Akron being on your schedule. And that's the problem. Like these games get scheduled in advance, but you're talking about a team now that because their non-conference this year wasn't great, your margin for error is even slimmer than other teams. Like Georgia, they could lose a second game, and because they now have a win over Texas, who was number 1 in the country at the time, like they might be okay to get back in the playoff, whether they win their conference or not, just because of the nature of the schedule that they play. And this is where I understand like there's the SEC bias and people are going to be mad I'm talking about this, but there is something to be said for like in the SEC every week you're seeing teams that are challenging each other. I mean, Tennessee just beat Bama. Like there's a lot of teams that are in the playoff picture right now in that conference. There are a lot of teams in the Big Ten as well, but like a win over Michigan isn't going to get you much this year, given how far they have fallen in recent weeks and what that roster looks like. And they certainly weren't I think they were number 10 or something to start the season, or maybe 8. Like they are certainly not that team at this point in the 2024 campaign. And so you're not going to get a lot of bonus points for beating a Michigan team that is now accumulating losses at a rapid rate. Like it's just not going to happen for you. So the Indiana game is going to be huge at the end of next month prior to the Michigan game. But this Penn State game, in all intents and purposes, decides the Buckeyes' fate. If you lose that game, I don't know that it's like any sort of shoo-in that they're going to make the college football playoff, even if they run the table the rest of the way and maybe don't win the Big Ten, but you're a 2-loss Big Ten team, Ohio State, big brand with the roster that you have, you could get left out just because you don't have the quality of wins, or you don't have the strength of schedule, or you just don't have the record against ranked opponents that the committee is going to be looking at to put teams in, and you might get jumped by somebody, or there might be a 3rd or 4th SEC team that gets in because of that. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting sort of rest of the schedule here for the Buckeyes. And that Penn State game could not mean more for a number of reasons. It means a lot in terms of the season and what's going to play out the rest of the way. And your strength of schedule being what it is, or your strength of victory being what it is, because you need those wins over ranked teams, and Penn State's up there. They're number 3. They're 1 spot ahead of you. But also it matters for Ryan Day. As I've been very, very vocal about the last couple of weeks, I can't make excuses for him anymore. When you're 1-7 against top 3 teams, that is a chance for him to get a win over a top 3 team, even if it's a little bit fluky because it's Penn State and he has tended to own Penn State. But that's the other key thing here. He has tended to own Penn State. Usually when he goes up against James Franklin, it is usually a contest to see who doesn't pee down their leg first. And normally James Franklin is the one who's left peeing down his leg. Like he's usually the one who kind of crumbles under the pressure of it all. But that game's on the road at Happy Valley. Not going to be an easy place to play. It never is, no matter what time the game is. And you got to go in there and assert yourselves as being still one of these top teams. And for Ryan Day's sake, like he needs that win to start feeling a little bit better about his record against these top teams. And again, it's going to feel a little fluky because it's just like kind of by happenstance of how this season has gone that Penn State's ranked 3rd. And I don't know that but he's owned them over the years. So generally you've had their number. And I don't know that people are going to treat a win over Penn State that's number 3 the same as they would have treated like Oregon, because it's like, well, you always beat Penn State. But in the same breath, like he still needs it to sort of calm the masses here and make people feel better about how his team performs in those moments and how he performs, frankly, in those moments as a head coach. So that game could not have higher stakes. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves because we know, as we just previewed, the Nebraska game is first. But that's why this weekend's important to sort of make it, I think, all of us feel a little bit better about this Buckeyes team and reestablish that they are still a national title contender and that the one loss to Oregon isn't going to sink their season and they're going to be okay. And that Will Howard can still, play at a high level, which I thought he was great in that Oregon game, as I've said, and that the defense can get back to playing at a high level. And then that maybe sets the stage or sets the tone for you to play Penn State and get a win that would go a long way in helping them this season, but also helping Ryan Day in terms of his resume that we continue to poke holes in at this point because there's no other way around it. Like, he's just got to show up in those games and get his teams, finally be able to get his team across that finish line and get some wins. Is how much are you worried or how much are you looking ahead to the Penn State game in terms of that being the make it or break it matchup for the Buckeyes this season? I think it decides their fate. I think that is the game that's going to determine what happens this season and whether or not Ryan Day is still here in 2025 potentially. Your thoughts at the 92 The Fan YouTube channel are much appreciated. But quickly, let's pause for a moment. When we get back, I'll give you the Michigan Panic Meter. I will give you the 4-down territory for the week with 4 different topics from around the world of college football. But first, here's a quick word from our sponsors. Final segment, Sons of the Shoe. Spencer German with you. No Nick Wilson this week. Hopefully he's with us for the post-game episode after the Nebraska game, which is hopefully going to be talking about a massive Ohio State win, and we'll be feeling all the good vibes from that one. In the meantime, though, guys, we always like to get to our Michigan Panic Meter in this segment, and even though Michigan at this point is pretty much a sinking ship, that team stinks. I mean, Ohio State could play that game, I would imagine, like blindfolded, and they could win. They've now lost 2 games in a row. Illinois, who's a ranked team, by the way, beat them, and they only scored 7 points. Their offense has no identity. They tried to pivot to Alex Orji, and that just hasn't worked. They don't really know who they are at this point. They started their 3rd quarterback this season, and so they're a mess. They're an absolute mess. But even though that's the case, we know those rivalry matches tend to be close no matter what the records are, no matter what the rankings say. And so I am keeping myself in the light gray for now. Again, and I've explained this before. I didn't change it. I didn't have time. I'm probably not quite that far close to the white. I'm probably more in between the dark gray and the light gray, sort of in like the middle ground gray, we'll call it. But this is just for visual purposes. I'm trying to kind of explain to you where I am on this meter. If you're watching, if you're not in the visual of it, if you're only listening to the audio version of this, I know what I'm explaining makes absolutely no sense. But I'm in the light gray, and it's only just because, like I said, I need to see it to believe it at this point with Ryan Day, even though I think Michigan's a terrible team and Ohio State should win. I'm not overly concerned, but it's more so about my concern level, as I think I explained last week, isn't about anything Michigan's doing or that anything Michigan can do. It's more about Ohio State, and do I trust them to, even in a game where they should dominate Michigan next month, actually put it all together and perform on that stage? And that's the big question I have. Like, it's about what Ohio State can do or what they won't do, more so than it is about what Michigan's going to do, if that makes any sense. All right, we keep it moving and we move on to 4-down territory. And I want to start on 1st down with a team that we talked about last segment. Is Indiana an actual threat to win the Big Ten? I think it's a fascinating question, and Indiana has been an impressive team so far this season. And I know we'll obviously have a chance to preview this matchup later in the season. I think there has been a lot of good from this team to this point. Curtis Rourke has looked pretty good. He's got 15 touchdowns and just 3 interceptions, and he's kind of the head of the cerebral sort of mind of the offense, if you will, kind of leading the charge. And then they have like this 2-headed snake backfield in Justice Ellison and Tyson Lawton, who kind of carry a lot of the workload on the ground. They have 16 touchdowns combined. And so this group has been very, very impressive. Not to turn this into like a preview for an Indiana game that's still a little under a month away. But, and it's guys like Mikhail Kamara on the defense who has 6 sacks this season. Like, they have some players, man. Like, I don't look at the roster and feel like they have a completely, dominant, like, they're not Ohio State in the way where like they're recruiting so great that they can outskill most teams, but they do have players that can do some damage, and they tend to like just grind you down because they have 2 running backs that can really work you, and Rourke is really good under center, and he's pretty smart with the way that he plays. So yeah, like I don't know that I consider them a threat in the Big Ten, because I think there's just teams that are better than them. Ohio State, Penn State, obviously Oregon, who's at the top of the conference right now. And I think that those teams can out-talent a team like Indiana. But the way that the season they put together has been great, and they are going to be a tough out for anybody in this conference, as I'm sure we'll find out with Ohio State here in a little under a month. Next, second down, is if Ashton Jeanty breaks Barry Sanders' record, is he a lock to win the Heisman? I would like to think so. I mean, that's a pretty tough thing to do. If you set the record for the most rushing yards in a single season, which hasn't been touched since Barry Sanders did it, obviously, man, like I would hope that's enough. But it's interesting because like if Colorado keeps doing what they're doing, I do think Travis Hunter is in play. Granted, he got hurt, and if he's hurt, that's going to take away his opportunities and his game tape. And I think there's going to be others. And we always know like this tends to be more of a quarterback award now more than anything. And so if there's some, if Carson Beck has a great, home stretch, if Quinn Ewers digs Texas now out of a little bit of a hole that they're in after losing to Georgia, like any of these guys could sort of swoop in and take it, depending on how the rest of the season goes with the, past like the midway point here. But I do like him as the front runner, especially if he being on pace to set that record. And if he breaks it, I think you almost have to give it to him, and it'd be worth it. And I would like to see us go give it to a running back, and even a running back on a team, by the way, who maybe isn't going to be a national title contender. Granted, they have a shot. We talked about some of the group of 5 teams that have a chance to make the playoff and make some noise, and Boise State is very much in that conversation. But I'd like to see him do it. I'm rooting for the kid. I think he's going to be really talented, and I also look forward to seeing him play on Sundays in the NFL. That brings us to third down, where I asked the question. I put 2 questions here. Will Quinn Ewers finish the season as the quarterback at Texas? I'm going to say yes, but I tell you what, man, like the second that a coach, and Steve Sarkisian has now put it out there, the second that you even waver in who your quarterback is and you replace them like mid-game like that, you leave the door open for so much doubt to creep in that maybe you don't fully believe in that guy. And I get it. Like, he came back in and he played better once he was sort of reinstated as the starter, and Arch Manning looked a little bit frazzled at times and didn't look great, and the offense didn't really work. I get he was trying to provide a spark, and as a coach, that's what you have to do. I don't know that there's I don't know that I would call it a quarterback controversy at this point, because Quinn is still so good. But the second that you put it out there that you have some doubt in your quarterback, it's going to be a topic of conversation. So I'm going to lean into the idea that he will finish as the starter, and that he'll be the guy the rest of the way, and whatever their playoff run looks like, he'll be there to sort of lead that charge. But it was an interesting move. I understood why he did it, but it was interesting. And he's going to be getting questions about that the rest of the season now. And last but not least, we talked about Boise State, and we talked last week about the possibilities of which group of 5 teams have a shot to make the playoff. And I'm asking this week, which group of 5 team do you want to see make the playoff the most? I actually leaning into the Ashton Jeanty conversation. My answer is going to be Boise State, because I think they have the best chance to actually compete with some of these teams and make it fun. But I will say the idea of and I'm not gonna say Army, because I'm a Navy guy. My brother went to Navy. I will never pick Army in anything, so you're not going to get me there. I will always say Navy. So the idea of Navy running the table, beating Army twice, getting into the playoff as a group of 5 team, if they also beat Notre Dame, who they played this weekend, like, I love the idea of that being a scenario that plays out, and we get one of our service academies in the playoff, the first iteration of the playoff. Like, all is right in America. If we get a service academy in the playoff, it should be Navy. It better be Navy if we're going to do that over Army. I know they got to win the game, but I'm just saying, my fandom showing its rearing its ugly head a little bit. Is it ugly though? I don't know. I'm a proud Navy fan because my brother went there. It's a cool thing. Army Navy game, by the way, highly recommend. If you've never been, go. Pageantry is awesome. It's a great experience. You like the two sides of the stadium. One side sing, they sing each other's songs, and whoever sings second is whoever won the game. It's so cool. You get chills. You feel some great pride in our country and in the sport of football that we love so much. Worth every single penny, every single time. I'd go back every year if I could afford it. But that was my sort of side note, my little aside there. But if I'm picking a team that I want to see in the college football playoff of the group of 5 teams, I think I'm going Boise State just because of the Ashton Jeanty storyline is too good to pass up, and I think they would actually have a chance to make some noise and maybe upset some teams in that playoff. All right, guys, appreciate you following along with us this week as we previewed the big matchup with Nebraska coming up on Saturday. Again, I implore you to like, follow, subscribe, review the Sons of the Shoe podcast wherever you get your podcasts: Spotify, Apple, Odyssey app. Did I mention Apple? I think I did, but I mentioned it again anyway. Also, the 92 Through the Fan YouTube channel where you can see my ugly mug. You can comment. You can let me know your thoughts on anything that we discussed today. We will be back, hopefully with Nick alongside, with a post-game edition of Sons of the Shoe after the Nebraska game on Saturday. I look forward to seeing you guys there, talking to you guys there, and reacting with you guys there. Until then, enjoy the rest of your week, and as always, go Bucs.